getting tired of them, it says your paycheck. So the motivation for why BP has that is somebody's paycheck. And so we can look for all the emotional and logical answers, but we all of us know that it's motivated by somebody's getting paid. John, you have brought up a lot of things that, again, like I used to say stuff, and Ronn witnessed it. You know, I would say stuff about the economy, and it was like Boogeyman Deluxe. This is pre-unicorns. You know, I used to be like the Dark Prince in a lot of ways. But the stuff that I said was like a unicorn and rainbow, you know, like Barney was with Baby Bop compared to the stuff that you said about the coral reefs and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Compared, and I'm kind of going back in time here, baselining what we were talking about when you first showed up in my world, that would probably be 2009, I'm guessing?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference now than 2009? Or 2008. You were around 2008. I'm lying. So 2008. What's the difference now, 7 years later?
Environmentally, or
environmental? No, specifically with the oceans.
Two numbers stick out initially. One is actually an atmospheric number, and that's the CO2 concentration, which has exceeded the 400 parts per million for the first time in recent history, which means thousands of years. What does that mean? The CO2 concentrations are rising. That isn't going. Why is that? Fossil fuels. The ocean absorbs an enormous amount of CO2. It's the great regulator. And way back, Andrew, you'll remember we talked about what happens if these rates of CO2 absorption in there hits the pH scale. Now, the pH scale ranges from 0 to 14, 7 being neutral. What has happened is the CO2 concentrations in the oceans have increased, and that's led to the pH level dropping. It's been noted and documented straight down the board many times by many scientific organizations that it's now attacking the base of the food chain, which, if you look back, that's something I said that's something we had to watch. If that collapses, we're in big trouble. And right now, the diatoms, the zooplankton, the plankton, these things are being attacked. And, hold on, Aqualad has a question. What? What?
Talking about.
Okay, you're silly. But, sorry about that, but he's an inquiring mind. I said zooplankton, he jumped in. So, the bottom line is, these are now being affected even down into the Southern Ocean in the Antarctic. Well, what does that mean? If the base of the marine food web dies, if it goes, and it's going, it's already impacting their shell development. They can't develop shells. They're not protected. They die. And it's going to have a cascading effect straight up the board. It's going to impact the marine food web. Now, what happens? You see this huge balloon in the middle right now of some forage fish numbers increasing regionally, not globally, but regionally. You see the higher-end predators still declining for other reasons, such as lack of food in some regions, whether it's shark finning, whatever it is. But you're seeing the top of the food chain being impacted, and you're seeing the bottom of the food chain, marine. That will spill over to land. Believe it or not, it will. So those are the two big numbers I see right now, decreasing pH, increasing CO2. And those things are directly connected to this whole East Coast drilling and Arctic drilling. Why are politicians who continually talk about renewable energy commitments, and job creation, if we go down that road, if they're really committed to it, we wouldn't even be having these public meetings about drilling on the East Coast and up in the Arctic. It would be a null and void point. Let's invest in renewable energy. Let's create more jobs, but they don't.
Don't you think it's fascinating? I mean, truly fascinating that the technology exists. The need is blatantly obvious. Everything is in place to make these changes, yet we continue to regress. fascinating. I mean, it really is kind of fascinating.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, and you're right, the technologies are there. Here off the coast of Maryland, we just approved a huge wind farm. I know there's one that's been approved up in New Jersey. And, you know, you're starting to see more of that, but not enough. You know, just not enough.
I want to shift gears for just a second. I want to bring Ronn on. And you work with a lot of young people in the Bronx. When you watch them and see what they're doing, what's kind of the word on the street with them, Ronn? What do they say? I mean, they have I'm an old fogey, but, I mean, these young people, what do they, when they look out, what are they telling you?
Well, the economy is really bad, and income inequality in this country has gotten to the point where we're just like a step ahead of serfdom. And young people are in the Bronx are organizing, and they're trying to build worker cooperatives where they're keeping their money local, they're keeping the money that they spend in the Bronx and investing in worker-owned cooperatives for industrial laundry cleaning. There's a soda bottling plant that they're talking about, farmers markets. All of this stuff is just like really trying to build a local tornado to kind of sprout up from the grassroots. And it's really starting to show. I mean, we have a very progressive city council right now, and our mayor is very far to the left. The environment is important to a lot of people, and people are starting to see that, you know, with this new technology comes jobs. You just have to change the messaging. The only thing that's hard about that is that you're beaten down every day. Like, you know, these kids are, kids are kids, and they want the new shiny iPhone and the new Galaxy phone, and they want this and they want that, and that's costing money, and that's money's going out of, their local communities. And, it's hard to keep people focused.
Ron.
Yeah, I mean,
no, go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, the other thing that's interesting is you look at what's happening, like in Ferguson. And I don't know if you guys saw that there was a murder, or what do you want to call it? A policeman killed a homeless man in L.A. just the other day. All these things are captured on film. We're kind of in the social justice league, because this is more my universe, I guess. Look at the social issues that are happening, again, relative to what we talked about. I mean, I said a lot of this is going to happen. I wrote this book a long time ago. I know Jost talks about it all the time. What's your take on what's happening in terms of relationships, community relationships, race relationships, what's happening with the police across the country? I'm curious, any of you, what you see happening and what your opinion is of what's going on there.
Well, in the Bronx, it's really interesting because there is a huge divide between the communities of color and the police. I think that it goes a long way with the theory of broken windows policing, where they're just. And you spoke about this in 2008 about how all of these guys are coming back from, the Middle East, and our police force are militarized. And when they have the equipment, they're going to get out there, they're going to use it, they're going to be aggressive, and they're going to go after people. And who are they going after? The people in the communities who are people of color who are just struggling to get by. And look, they killed a guy for selling loose cigarettes out in Staten Island. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, and he seemed like such a nice man, you know, and you have this outrage, like with Eric, and then, you know, with Trayvon Martin, but it's short-lived, yet they're all, like, I actually have a friend, a Facebook friend, whose brother was killed by a policeman, the same situation. This was last year. I mean, there are all these stories that happen. So, I mean, I know this, you know, somebody firsthand, right? But it statistically, it's not that far-fetched to know somebody firsthand. It happens so often. Jost, what is your take on this? Because I know you're an impassioned social critic. When you look at what's going on, how do you feel when you see these stories over and over and over?
Well, it's interesting because I was listening to what Ron was saying, and you know, I think that, and it's interesting that you should say, you know, we're flooded with the same stories over and over and over again, and I wonder how much that, you know, we're still conditioned by the same old stories that are just news feed on MSM, you know, that just kind of perpetrate the same stereotypes. And, you know, I wonder, and the thing about it is that we hear about the bad news that's going on, but we don't really hear about we may hear a little bit, but we don't hear as much about what's happening, what's being mobilized within local grassroots organizations and what's happening within the smaller communities that makes up the larger communities. And, you know, we're so conditioned by what's being streamed on the MSM news stories. And again, it goes back to we're just perpetrating the same archetypes, we're perpetrating the same stereotypes. It's certainly, it's flooded not only in the news stories, but it's flooded on TV series and film, which it glamorizes those stereotypes, and it keeps the machine well-oiled and well-greased. So, you know, I don't know how we can sort of quantum leap out of that. It's sort of right now. It's a social crisis. Definitely, it's a social crisis. But how are you going to change? How are you going to change the machine? How can you change people's minds that are so plugged into the machine? I mean, that's the real crisis.
And you could say that the Social Justice League, in whatever flavor it's taken, has been designed to speak to that, right? I mean, all of us in our own way have tried to address that. You know, I've written about it, talked about it. Ron is, you know, feet on the ground in the Bronx. John, oh my God, just works all the time. And Jost, you're like me. We do a lot of writing and talking. And I personally think that things from a consciousness level are better than they were when we started this. I mean, the stuff that I used to say, now people accept the things I used to say. I don't even have to say it anymore. But Ron's my witness. When I would say this stuff 8 years ago, Ron, what was that like? You know, I mean, people's heads couldn't, you know, they were exploding. I mean, what was you remember that era? What was it like back then?
Yeah, I mean, I really remember when people would call up and be really angry with you and saying that, like, you were just like this negative Nelly who had all this bleak stuff. And that's why every time you talk about unicorns and rainbows now, I start laughing. And when people criticize you for the rainbows now, I'm like, these are the same people that are going to see in a couple of years that he was absolutely right again.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because it goes back to the idea of psychics making predictions, negative predictions, and Jost had to deal with this too. You know, you go, well, I didn't make a negative prediction. I made a prediction something actually happened. You know, and when I say, you know, the economy, I actually think the economy is a lot better than it was in 2007. But if you make it go up or down,